Aloha, Let's Talk Story podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Ebalaroza-Kawano, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. Today's guest is a woman whose voice, insight, and lived experience are helping redefine what leadership looks like from the inside out. We have Tracy Doyle. She is an award winning entrepreneur, author of Life Storms Finding Your Clear Sky. I love that title. And the creator of the Aurora Method. A former CEO, Tracy knows firsthand the high cost of high performance and how emotional burnout can quietly erode clarity, connection, and self trust. Through her work, Tracy helps women uncover what's driving burnout beneath the surface and guides them toward emotional self awareness, calm, and sustainable leadership. In today's conversation, we'll walk through the Aloha Always framework, affirmations and actions, leadership and love, overcoming obstacles, health and healing, and the acute awareness, and explore how Tracy's transformed personal reckoning into purpose. So let's take a breath, open our hearts, and talk story with Tracy Doyle. But before we start, Tracy, before we go into the Aloha framework, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that I said a lot already.
Well, no, thank you. And I'm so grateful to be here today. What most people know about me is everything that you just said. I'm a successful entrepreneur. I built and led this business. I sold it, and I've written a book. That's what they know about me. What they didn't
Mhm.
know was the struggle, you know. I grew up, in a my mom had me as a teenager, and she was mentally ill. And back in that time, they didn't really know what that was. She had bipolar disorder. And so at a
Mhm.
very young age, I experienced some profound experiences, that were traumatic as a result of my mom's mental illness. And that's not to say that mental illness is a bad thing. It's that when people don't have it treated, sometimes they just make bad choices, and those bad choices really affected me profoundly. So really by the age of 10, I had seen, pretty much the dark side of life. And I became my mom's parent. And then of course I started becoming the parent for my mom's my half siblings, my sister, my brother. So at a very young age, right? The thing is I grew up believing that I had to sacrifice myself, right? For my family at first, then as life went on, for my relationship, and then my job, right? And so that sacrifice just really it took me on a journey, and that journey was one where I can actually remember it like it was yesterday. I was basically, it was December 21st of 1999, and I was, getting ready for work. It was around the holiday times, and it was a cold gray winter's day. And as I'm getting ready for work, I get a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and my eyes were hollow, my spirit was just dim, and for a minute I didn't even recognize the woman looking back at me in the mirror, because I just looked so empty, and and inside, in my head, I was whispering to myself. It started with, I'm done, I'm done, and then it crescendos into, I'm done, I'm done taking care of my mother, I'm
Yeah.
done being responsible for my sister's kids, and I felt like I was stretched in every single direction at work. And I'm like, I'm done with that, I'm done being the fixer, because as leaders we fix, right? And then I felt like I was in conflict with everyone, so I'm like, I'm done being in conflict. And so, where I went next with that was now like, gosh, if I got drunk enough, I might crash the car. And if I crashed the car, no one would know this is what I wanted for myself, because I didn't want anyone to know that I was weak. Right. And so, I was jolted awake later that night because I had gone through with that. And someone was knocking on my window, and I'm, jolted awake, and my car's facing oncoming traffic, and I'm a hair away from a head on collision. And in that
Wow.
moment, you know, it was like, what have I done? Because I had almost killed two people in a head-on collision, and it was a reckoning where it was just, where did I go? How did I get so lost? And just how do I get my life back, right? And that next day, that's really when change started, because as I was walking to a school meeting, I yelled out, I want to live again, and the real lesson I got from that whole experience was that, sacrifice isn't about abandoning ourselves. And so many of us as leaders, we abandon ourselves. And the thing that I learned was that sacrifice is about putting ourselves first in the middle of managing it all. And we manage it all. And I joke that we're all CEOs. We're CEOs of our family, we're CEOs of our life, and we're leaders, at our jobs. And so for me, what felt like, I don't know, over 10 years, I realized that, it wasn't my mom, it wasn't the demands of my job, it wasn't all of the things that were happening that were breaking me. It was really my own belief doing it, and my beliefs rather doing it. And it's- for me, I always felt like I didn't belong. And what I realized was that if I did everything for everyone, then I would, And so I had to learn how to reshape those things that shape me. And when I learned how to reshape that, that's when I found my way back to myself, back to my life, and really back to the people that I love. And really, for me, that's when I found my purpose as a leader. And that's when I found my purpose in helping others as well. So leadership for me means many things. And leading a business, I had to find myself and go real, real deep to get there. And that's who I am. It was a woman who struggled a lot with all of the pressures and demands of life and not knowing how to manage it, and realizing that it was really coming from within me, and this internal belief system that I had created as a result of my life experiences. And they drove me. And as you heard, they drove me to a place that, wanted to end it all. And then I realized, when I learned to reshape all of that, I basically can lead with much more clarity.
That is, thank you so much for sharing that. That is an amazing story. It moves me because I know the that part in your life where you're like, I'm done, and where you are at that point where you're like, this is the best way. The best way is out. Every
Exactly.
story carries layers of courage, reflection, and truth. And yours reminds us that awareness often begins when we finally slow down enough to listen. And that's listening, to yourself, and how, like, for me, in that hard part in my life, I was gifted with this Aloha framework. And through my own journey of healing, and faith and creativity, is what began as something personal, became something that was I was called to share. It became my mission, and through my speaking, my coaching, and my books, Walking in Aloha, 5 Steps to Living Your God Potential Life, and the 31 Steps to Mastery, um, is what I can now share. So, what I've discovered with this framework globally, and now I can share it through the wonders of the internet. I'm in Hawaii, and you're in, where are you in
New
again?
Jersey, New Jersey.
New Jersey. See how far apart we are. I know we were just talking about time differences,
Yes.
right? And like I said, I'm in Hawaii, you're in New Jersey, and I've spoken to people all over the world, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Spain, all over. So the internet, it's just amazing. So through this podcast, I've come to realize that every guest already lives aloha, and sometimes without even realizing it, without even knowing it, through their actions, their own leadership and resilience and their healing. they walk in aloha.
Mhm.
So I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that you're here. And through the Aloha Always framework, we want to just hear how it shows up in your life and how it shows up in your leadership. So, with that, the pillars of Aloha, we're going to go through that. And the first A, if you can just go and start with the questions I sent you earlier. Um, and thank you again for sharing your story. Affirmations and actions. We'll start with that. During your years as a CEO, what internal affirmations or beliefs were quietly shaping your actions, especially during that time of burnout?
Yeah, and I wanted to add one thing before I answer that. You
Yeah,
talked about listening to yourself, and
yeah,
what I wanted to say is that so many women, I mean, I was recently reading data around how many women are struggling with emotional burnout. One in two women, it's very, very common. And the main thing is oftentimes we think that it means we're failures. But I loved what you said. When we listen to ourselves, what we realize is burnout is nothing more than a signal. It's a signal trying to wake us up to say, hello, I'm in here. So the question, what are my affirmations and actions? The first thing I had to do is really, really get deep with myself to recognize the first action I took was what life experiences shaped my thinking, right? What were they? And, for me, I had a few things based on some of the experiences that I had had in my earlier life. And as I said, I had some pretty profound trauma. And it doesn't mean that everyone has to have trauma. What I've come to learn is that we're all wounded. We've all had experiences in our life that we internalize, right? And so what I internalized was a few beliefs. One was I didn't belong. I just shared that. But the other one was nobody cares. Now, as a leader, how did that affect me when I thought nobody cared? I would move immediately into fear. Oh no, I'm going to lose the business, or oh no, we're going to lose this. And it really affected me even at home. If no one cares, oh no, that means I have to do everything myself, right? And then what would I do? I would act in a way that wasn't commensurate with what was really happening because I was distorted with this belief. So I had to uncover. So my actions were, how do I uncover that? What do I do? And for me, I was very, very lucky. I had a friend of mine who had also struggled with burnout, and she discovered a tool, and this tool for me was amazing. I studied psychology and counseling for many years, and I wanted to actually be a clinical psychologist, but I had put myself through school having grown up in poverty, so I couldn't afford to get my advanced degree. But what she showed me was this tool that really just asked me simple questions. Who are you angry with? Who hurt you? And what did they do? And then you went into how did it affect you? And what it was really looking at was your needs, your basic needs, which to me spoke to things I learned about Abraham Maslow, who says, whenever your needs are stunted as a result of a wound, then you sort of start living in a place of discontent and lack, right? And you're seeing what you don't have. So so the action of uncovering that then took me to how did I respond in kind to those things? And I got to see my traits. And what I recognized is that I was self-centered. These initial beliefs that I created these self-centered traits. Now, many of us struggle with this idea of self-centeredness, but let me give the example. I became self-reliant, right? That's a self centered trait. I was consumed with, I have to do everything myself. And so many of us as women, that's what we do, right? I also became consumed with self pity. And I felt sorry for myself. I had my mentally ill mom. As you heard my Dunn story, right? I had this, I had that. And if you had my life, you would do everything yourself too, right? And you'd feel you'd have to do everything yourself. So the action was really recognizing what was limiting me, right? What was holding me back? And what I've learned, it was fear and self centered thinking. So the affirmation for me, what started was, it's been an iterative process for me. But back then, I had to really start with I'm centered, I'm calm, I'm enough, I'm handling it. Those are my affirmations. I'm centered, I'm calm, I'm enough, and I'm handling it. And I would just walk daily, especially when things at work, I call it, the reason I named the book Life Storms is because we have daily churn as we're trying to manage it all. So how do we calm ourselves in the middle of the storm? So what I would do, especially, when I was leading the business, and, you heard, I built it into a multi-million dollar enterprise. It was a lot of pressure, and I'd have my mom then calling me over here because she needed something in the middle of managing it all at work. And I would honestly, 1 minute reset, breath, right? And for me, it would be breathe in, calm, exhale my fear. In some cases, it was breathing in calm, exhaling my anger, because sometimes I would feel anger, and it was just then affirming, I'm centered, I'm calm, I'm enough, I'm handling it. And the more I did that, I would reset. And I would have to have 1 minute resets in the beginning of learning how to uncover, or I'm sorry, manage myself through these feelings that kept taking me to this place. I
Mhm.
would reset probably 1 minute. It felt like every 15 minutes. It was like start the day over, another reset. But it really worked. So for the first A, I would say those were the actions, and the affirmations that I took. And it really started with that self-assessment that my friend shared with me, and recognizing how my life experiences shape my thinking. Because what I saw was, over time, I was able to change those affirmations, because as I was able to see the traits that I created, I can then name them, and then I could change them. So if I'm self-reliant, especially as I started paying attention to my traits, my affirmations began to change, which was, it's okay if I don't manage it all. I'm letting people help me. I'm accepting help. I'm accepting help. And for many times for me, I felt ashamed if I had to ask for help. So
Mhm.
it's okay to ask for help. I'm accepting help. And that was probably another big one in the beginning as well, as I was going through that early burnout recovery journey.
That is so good, because sometimes people look at it like being selfish when you
Yes.
think about yourself. But, sometimes we need to be that selfish leader. I always say people need to remember about the oxygen mask in the airplane. You need
Mm.
to put on that oxygen mask before you can save anyone else. You need to take care of yourself because you are no use to anyone else if you cannot take care of yourself
You're
first.
100%. I agree 100%. And what I want to add to that is that, when I talk about self-centeredness, like I call them in my book the issues, because they're traits that we're consumed by. And what we don't realize is they block us. They
Yeah.
block us from true connection, because we're not able to truly give, and we're not able to receive if so for me, if I was consumed as a leader with self-reliance, what message was that sending others? It was telling
Right.
people I didn't trust them. It was
Mhm.
telling people that I didn't think they were good enough. And it was causing rift, like, bouncing off one another instead of coming together and working together. And as a leader, I had to come to terms with how these self centered traits really affected others. And when I did, to your point about putting yourself first, that's what I mean. Sacrifice is not about abandoning yourself. It's about putting yourself first and realizing they're going to be okay, right? They will be okay when we change ourselves from within and manage what our needs are first.
Yeah. That is so good. So powerful. So right now, what are the affirmations or intentional actions do you use now? The practices that you use now to stay grounded, clear, and aligned? Because a lot of times we can do it when we're back there and when we need it, but then when things start getting better and we're like, oh, I'm good now, then we tend to forget. So,
Exactly.
so what do you do now to keep yourself grounded?
Yeah, for me, having learned what my traits were, so I can't emphasize that enough. Every night before I go to bed, I ask myself, how did I do today? Right?
Oh, good.
Do I owe
Good.
anyone an apology? Did was I always want to say impulsive or reactive, because sometimes I can be reactive. Did I react to anyone in a way that could have been harmful or hurtful? Was I unkind? You know? Was my serenity disrupted, right? And was my calmness disrupted? And, and as I go through my day, this is a 5-minute exercise that I do at the end of the day. And I can review my day like a movie, and I can see, okay, it happened again. I was either self-reliant, or in some cases I might be self-righteous, where I want to be right. If someone, I'm in the midst of having a conversation, I want to impose my will on people and be right about something. I go through that. And so I've designed my own personal affirmations for each trait. And so what I'll do is I get up the next day and I will set my intention based on the trait that I want to be. So for me, mostly, I pretty much will say that I am open and receptive to the challenges and opportunities that are before me, and I embracing those opportunities. I still say I'm centered and I'm calm, but for the most part, I'm kind, I'm understanding, I'm giving, and that's where I take it today, because that's the person who I want to be today. And I always want to be calm, because I have a tendency sometimes to react. My triggers sometimes, I always put them out here. Sometimes things will be said or done, but it reactivates that old wound and that old belief, and I could feel it that quickly. So my goal today is to remain aware. So when I'm affirming that I'm calm and I'm centered, I now can feel the churn. And if I feel myself bristling, I know I need to reset and do an affirmation of being centered and calm and kind and understanding and peaceful. So I hope that made
That
sense.
is
But
so
that's what
good.
I do. It's an evening and morning intention, and I set them every day. And I will say, when I don't, I practice it daily, but there's days where I might have overslept, or I wasn't expecting, like this morning, I had an unexpected early morning meeting that came up that I wasn't aware was happening. And my morning will get disrupted a little bit. So what I do in that situation is I try to find some time for me. And sometimes, if I can, I'll do a quick walk. I like to have a walking meditation, and that works for me very well too. And I can get to take some time to reset that.
That's so good. That walking, people don't realize that in that moving, that really does help, you know, in that moving, just taking that time to move. It's so good. So let's move on to L, the leadership and love. That's the L in Aloha. So you've spoken before about unspoken cost of leadership,
Hmm.
the unspoken cost of leadership. Now, how did burnout affect the way you led others? And how did learning to lead yourself with compassion and honesty change everything?
That is a long story, but what I'll say is, for me, my burnout, as you heard, took me to the end. And when you understand burnout, it starts out as stress. It then starts to move into overwhelm. Then it goes into conflict, where you feel like you're just at odds with the world. And then from there, it goes to emotional dysregulation. In other words, we're having reactions that aren't commensurate with what's really happening. And I became super, super reactive as a leader. It just seemed like, no matter what, it was like, it was a volcanic eruption that was happening, because I just couldn't handle one more thing. So that's what my team had to experience. Not that they experienced it every day, but I would say they experienced it a lot. So as I gained clarity, for me, emotional clarity, as I said, is recognizing what what old wound is being triggered, and what belief is stoking what I call the reaction cascade, right? So I want to walk you through that, right? So if I have a belief where I have to, like, nobody cares, right? So it could be no one cares, and I go right to, I'm not good enough, and then I go right to, I like the Tony Robbins way of describing fear: loss, less, and never. So I'll go into, oh no, I'm going to lose this, or I'm never going to be able to, whatever. In many cases at work, it would be, sell the business, right? Because I was trying to build it to sell it. And as soon as that would happen, I'd go to a trait, right? A self-centered trait. And the actions on the outside would always inevitably be the same thing. I would either be reactive, and I would seem, thoughtless with my responses. So I don't want to say it was always a volcanic eruption, but I might say something sarcastic. I might say something glib. I might say something dismissive, right? And so What I had to come to terms with was the impact of my actions on my team as a result of my burnout, and those old wounds that were triggering me to a point that separated me from everybody. And I mean, disconnected not only from me, but from them, because I couldn't even lead with compassion. So as I went on the journey of healing and recognizing these traits and working daily to affirm, to sort of affirm them away. So I would say something like this: I am, basically releasing self reliance, and I am replacing it with the ability to accept help. And then I'd follow it with affirmations, right? And I had to lovingly look at the impact of those things that happened in my life and how they shaped me lovingly rather than critically. And as I continue to do that, and whenever I'd have a reaction, I'd have to calm myself again and basically reset myself through these things. Like in some cases, I'm removing righteousness, I'm releasing self righteousness, and I'm replacing it with the ability to understand someone else. And what I'd say is, I'm kind and I'm understanding. So how it helped, so I have to give you, that work took a long time. So ultimately it got to a point where I was able to lead with love, lead with kindness. And when I would have what I would call a storm flare, because those traits would flare out, and if I had one, it was about immediately addressing it. So how I just responded was unfair, what I just said was unfair, and acknowledging the other individual, that it has nothing to do with them. So that was an unfair thing to say. Let me re-say that. And I didn't intend to hurt you if it came across that way. Let me restate that. And I had to get better at my communication, because I found in burnout I lost the ability to communicate kindly and lovingly and with understanding and compassion. With the work, and as you know, I created a method called the Aurora method, and it's 8 practices that I started instituting daily. And it started with the self-awareness, and then from there it moved on into emotional clarity and recognizing my patterns, and then from there it worked on really working on changing them, right? And then mending relations, and really fostering connection and building that connection. So as I did that at home, as I did that at work, it started to spill. And what I saw was I started to change the dynamic of my team dynamic at work, my home dynamic. And that's not to say that I'm human. I'm still going to get frustrated. Things are still going to happen. But with emotional clarity, with the ability to recognize the patterns of those traits, we have the ability to design our own personalized mindfulness program. And in doing that, we can have our own personalized affirmations and work through our stuff in a way that helps us, but ultimately helps others, because it gives us the ability to communicate better.
That is so good because, when we can model that, when we can do that for other people, that is what gives them permission to do the same.
Exactly.
A lot of times that is what people, it holds them back because they're like, everyone around me is doing the same thing. Everyone is acting the same way, and it holds them
Exactly.
back. But once they see a difference, once they can see someone else, like you, who are like, no, we all need change. Let me be this change that everyone sees. Then it gives people that permission to be like, you know what? We can do better. We can do this. We can look at things a bit better, make those small little shifts, those small little changes, and do well for other people instead of just,
Yeah. Yeah, because
yeah,
the cost of leadership is, if we
it
don't take
is.
care of ourselves and we burn out, we're creating a culture of fear. We create
Hmm.
toxic work
Yes.
environment, because we're basically saying, I give permission for others to act like this, and it's
Right.
unacceptable, right?
Right.
And that actually happened in my company. I learned about it later. It's a whole nother story, but it happened. And once I recognized it, the perception was, because I had been like that, and although I'm working on myself, there were people
Mhm.
that had burned themselves out. The perception was I accepted that. So it wasn't until, I had my HR do us, basically, we did like an internal survey, and she did some interviews. We
Yeah.
uncovered it, right? And then what it was about was really building culture shifts. And for me, it's especially when I would have a setback, because I still have emotional setbacks, not as severe as I had then. But when I did, I let people see my humanness, because I think a lot of us as women, we're so afraid to let people see our vulnerability. At least I was. I was afraid that they
Mhm.
would think I was weak, and when I shared my vulnerability, I actually built a stronger, more committed team.
Yeah, that's so good. So, you did share, like that, such a powerful truth in that vulnerability and everything like that. But uh, before you said, I don't think you mentioned it now, but maybe in your book or sometime, you said, I didn't just burn out, I burned bridges. So, what obstacle was hardest to face in your healing journey? And what helped you move through self forgiveness and repair? So, the O in Aloha is overcoming obstacles. Because a lot of times in our lives, while we're trying to move through things, it's those obstacles. And we don't want to look at obstacles like sometimes it's like walls or mountains that we need to climb, but we want to look at them like stepping stones, things that we just move through, we get through. So, what were those things that you moved through?
Yeah, there was a time when I thought that my burnout was a them problem, right? So if
Powerful.
they just did what I asked, I would not
Right.
have reacted that way. And then it was an us problem. If my spouse just would support me and do what I need, then I wouldn't have reacted that way. And so,
Yes.
what I didn't recognize, as I was saying before, when I started to see my traits, one of my traits that I identify was self-importance, right? That's why I call them the ishes, self hyphen ish. Importance is the ish. And I was consumed with, don't you know who I am? I got out of poverty. How dare you question me, right? That was a big obstacle. The other obstacle was self-righteousness, because I came to believe that since I got up and through a lot of the things that I had overcome, my way was the only right way. And as we know, when you get what I call a who's right fight, it goes into I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right. And there's one winner. And when there's one winner, what we're doing is alienating another person, and we burn a bridge and we push
Mhm.
people away. And I think a lot of us with burnout don't recognize that we're all wounded. We trigger each other, for one, right? But when we have the capacity to recognize how burnout affects, it's all shaped from distorted beliefs that were shaped in our early life experiences and push us through the reaction cascade, and we can change that. We can heal it. But for me, I had to overcome those traits that were limiting me. And so another one that was huge, especially as a leader, was self-avoidance. Okay. So here I was, I'm a CEO, and there's so many things I didn't know, but like many women, I've read many books about women in leadership. We think we have to check every single box and know every single thing, right? And so, but when I didn't know something, what I found was I would just avoid it. I didn't want to deal with it. So it was like, you can do that. Like, I hired you to do that. But meanwhile, they would need my leadership, right? So, what I found was that would not only hold me back as a leader, but it would hold others back in terms of their own personal growth and development as leaders themselves, because I just didn't want to talk about it. And it was really nothing more than just me being afraid of people, you know, finding out that I didn't know what I was doing, rather than being human about it and problem solving. Right. So those two self-centered traits really were the biggest obstacles. Well, actually three. Self-avoidance, self-importance, and self-reliance were probably the most, I would say, detrimental traits and obstacles to getting to the point of mending relations with others. Because the bridges that I burned, let me give an example. When I was avoiding, I'd have people who would feel they'd give up and they would quit. So at work, that's what would happen. In personal relationships with family, I would avoid, I didn't want to deal with them. So they would just lovingly let go. Right. And where did I end up? Feeling alone on an island, on a desert island. And we heard where it took me, because I felt like I was in conflict with everybody. So that truth of recognizing that our burnout just doesn't burn us, it burns others too. right? And when we can embrace the truth of how we burn relationships and we burn others, and it's up to us to change that dynamic, then change is possible. So that's where self-forgiveness comes from. So what it looks like, I talk about it in my book. I call it acknowledgement conversations. I had the privilege of hearing Oprah Winfrey. She came to New Jersey, and I remember her just walking out on the stage and saying, acknowledgement is the greatest gift you can give to anyone. And at the time, I was so taken by it that I picked up my phone and I wrote that down. I reflected deeply and I realized that oftentimes when we're communicating, we jade. So I wear jade now to remember this. What do? We jade. We justify why we said something. We argue in many cases why we believe something. We defend how we handled something, or we explain and explain and explain why. And what I found is when we are burning bridges, we're not building a bridge back if we're jading, because people don't want to hear it, right? Acknowledgement is, as I said before, I gave the example, you know, I was really thinking, this is one I did with my mom, is really reflecting on how I've handled our relationship. And I realized that any time that you get frustrated with me, I just leave and I silently punish you, and I don't talk to you for days and weeks. And back when I was younger, it would be months. And I realized how hurtful that was to you, because you must have been so terrified that you didn't know where I was because I didn't call and I didn't check in. And she starts crying and she says, yes, yes, yes. And what I said is I've realized how unfair and hurtful that was. And from this point forward, I assure you, I will not do that again, no matter how hard it gets. And for the rest of my mom's living life, that's how I lived with her. And that's mending. And that was building a bridge back. Up until that point, yes, my mom had issues. And when I realized it wasn't her, it's how I internalized her. It wasn't her. And she was a one-way relationship for me because of her limitations. She couldn't nourish in the way in which I needed. But what I realized is God gave me so many people that nourished me, and that, I can give the gift back of healing to her and bridging that relationship. And that was probably one of the most poignant for me on a personal level. But in a business sense, I would basically react in a way, and then I would avoid, and I didn't want to admit that I did that because I thought it was weakness. And what I realized was showing people my humanness, which would be bringing someone in and saying, I reacted before, and it was, I said, I shared this before too. I reacted before. It was so unfair of me to say that like that. And my intent was not to hurt you. My intent was not to criticize you. My intent was not to lead you to believe that you're not doing a good job, because you're doing a great job. I didn't handle it well. So what I meant to say was, and then I meant from there. And so what I have found is it's the communication, by always thinking, how can I acknowledge someone? How can I acknowledge what I did was not correct, was handled poorly or wrong? Many of us don't want to say we're wrong. We feel like it's like a right wrong thing. So it's not about blame. It's about recognizing that we're all human. We all have these traits that lead us to acting in ways in which we're not proud of, and it's okay. But when we love ourselves enough, we love ourselves enough to be human with others so that we can keep building bridges back.
That's so good. You mentioned something about, like your mom, how she wasn't able to give the things, like she wasn't able to. And that's one thing that we need to realize with other people. They just might not have the capacity, they
Yep.
just might not have the capacity. And we can't expect that and be upset or angry with them because they can't deliver what we're expecting, because it's not fair. And it's like, how many times do you feel like someone is expecting so much from you, and you're like, that's probably where they're coming from, right? That's where they're coming from. They're like, in their space, in their mind, they're like, you should be able to do this. But what if that's not where they're at? And so we need to look at other people that same way.
Yeah,
So good.
accepting others is accepting limitations, and it's accepting the
Mhm.
good, and it's accepting the not so good, right?
Yeah.
And for me, it took a long time to recognize that sometimes I was looking at life through a straw, right? Before I understood how these early beliefs affected and shaped me, I was looking at life like
Mhm.
this, right? And it was what
Mhm.
you didn't do rather than all the things you could do, but where your limitations were because I wasn't accepting. And I've learned that acceptance is the answer for a lot of things.
Yeah, so good. And that just leads us right into that health and healing, because that's where it all comes. Because if we are not in that healthy place, if we're not healing, there's no way that we can look at life in that light, in that lens, right? And sometimes maybe we have to borrow someone else's lens for a little while, but it's good when we start being able to look at life in with our own lens. But your work centers on emotional wellness, not just rest or productivity. What does true healing look like beyond stepping away? And how can women and men begin prioritizing emotional health without guilt or shame?
Yeah, so I love this question because healing starts first when we recognize, as I said
Yeah.
before, how our life experiences shape us. So when we reshape what was shaped, it's a daily practice. And for me, what I've learned is the more I practice, the more I do that end of the day look back, and then I set my intentions the next day. What starts to happen is things start to, I don't want to say go away, but they melt away. They come back, but they start to melt away. But the beauty is we start to recognize these same traits in others. And it's not that we're looking at them with criticism, we're looking at them with understanding. And the more understanding that we have, we're able to heal and bridge relationships because we can acknowledge in a different way. So sometimes I'll notice, for example, I used to get defensive, right? Because I would think I wasn't good enough, and I was self-important. Don't question me, and I would get sarcastic. So when I see someone do that today, I recognize, okay, they have a wound, they have a belief. I don't know what their wound and belief is, but I could see their trait. And what I will always say in an example like that is I didn't intend to make you feel like I was questioning you. Actually, I was asking a question, and and basically I want to clarify what I meant. And I say it calmly because now I can see it in a way that I can actually acknowledge and engage with others on a different level. That is what healing looks like to me, because today I can have healthy conversations, for one. When I recognize how I'm triggered, I can create boundaries. What's not good for me? So again, my mom, having I had to recognize and accept I had a one-way relationship with her. So my mom, in her way, sometimes would put demands on me that were unrealistic. So I had to learn to say no, and no is a complete sentence, no period, right? And recognize that that was healthy for me, right? And so it's really recognizing what's good for me and what's not. I will say though that I couldn't do that by myself. I personally built what I called Life Storm Buddies. I built a network of other like-minded women who were working on similar things. They had burned out. They had different ways. I had other people in my life, they hadn't burned out, but they just were working on negative thinking, and it was amazing. And so I literally bounce off things, and I always talk through like some of the ways in which I handle stuff and how my thought process and where it takes me. And what I find is when I bounce that off of someone, I get really good perspective. And sometimes I get stuck in my own perspective. So I need to come out of it. So healing for me also means my perspective is not only the right perspective or the only perspective, that I need others to come outside of me and give me their perspective so that I can take those inputs and really reflect. So healing to me and health is all about daily reflection, and daily intention, and making conscious choices and conscious actions that are not only well and good for me, but also with the understanding and kindness for others.
That's so good. I'll share with you this story. My husband, he goes, "Oh, let's go to the movies." Okay, so he usually picks the movie that we go to because I don't really watch a lot of TV or anything like that. And so he's like, let's go see this movie. It's a boxing movie. He's an Olympic, no, Golden Gloves champion. He's a Golden Glove champion, boxing champion. And so he likes boxing. So as soon as he mentions boxing, I'm like, sure, let's go. And I'm in the middle of working, right? I'm on my computer and he goes, okay. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Not even asking what the movie is about or anything. Boxing, sure, we'll go. What time are we going? That's all I need. What time are we going? Can I get this done? That's all I need. So we end up going to this movie. And all I know is that it's a movie about a female boxer. And I'm like, cool. We get there and it is starting to get that hint of, oh, it's domestic violence,
Mm.
right? And the trigger starts to happen. I come from that whole background of domestic violence, and I start telling him, like, I can hear it
Mm.
in the way that the guy's voice is, the way he's treating her, talking to her, like the control he's having over her. And I'm like, oh, telling him, oh, that is just so real. That is, that's just not the movies, that's how it is for real. That's how it is in the background, like, and it's getting worse now in this movie. It's getting worse. And I'm like, oh, this is just not good. This movie is not good, And he's like, then he comes out and he says, oh, it gets worse. And I look at him, I say, you know the story? And he said, oh, yeah, I heard about it. And I'm thinking, and you didn't tell me? I'm like, I think you should have told me. But I'm in the theater and thank God that I'm in a healed space, but I know what I'm feeling already because of what I'm seeing and hearing and how she's acting. And I'm like, oh, this is too real because I lived it. That's on the screen, but I know it because I lived it. And so the whole movie goes by, and you can look it up. It's called Christie. Good movie, true story. And my heart is just like
Mm.
hurting for her,
Mhm.
right? Movie's done, everything. And I know something got triggered inside, but I'm toughening it out. you know, I'm like, "Whew, can handle this." But I was just toughening it out. I could feel myself like, because I know I was crying through the movie, emotions were happening, but I'm not in that space anymore. I'm telling myself, no, I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm done with that. But I still somewhere inside got triggered. We got home and he said something that was barely anything. I don't know what it even was. It was the smallest thing, but then I reacted,
Mhm.
right? It was that snap back.
Mhm.
And as soon as I said it, I realized, oh, hold on a moment. I need to stop. I
Mhm.
said, you know what? That movie affected me more than I'm admitting,
Mhm.
and I had to say that
Mhm.
because there's times in our lives where things can go fine. We can say that we've walked through the healing and we've done the work. And that's the truth. We've done the work. But there's going to be times like that
Mhm.
where something's going to come up and it's going to trigger something. But we have to be okay enough to say, wait a moment.
Mhm. And acknowledge
Wait
it.
a
You
moment
acknowledged
and
it. That's
acknowledge.
right. Mhm.
Yeah. And go, wait a minute. That was wrong for me to
Mhm.
that was not you,
Mhm.
right? That was not you. That was my past that just
Mhm.
reacted right there. That
That's
was
right.
just my past. And I shouldn't have snapped at you that way or reacted that way. What you said was so small. My reaction was so big
Mhm.
because it had nothing to do with what just happened here. It had everything to do with what happened in my past, and the movie triggered that in me. And so it's like recognizing that and knowing that brought me to the realization like, wow, I've gone through all of that healing, but still could feel that much hurt.
Mhm.
And it wasn't even me, it was the
Mhm.
movie.
Mhm.
But that's real life because
It
we know
is.
we lived it, and we still have those scars. We still have those
Mhm.
markers. It doesn't just go away. And if somebody can tell you it's going to go all away, it's going to be gone, it's going to disappear, you're never going to see it again, that's a lie.
I
They're
agree.
going to, yeah, that's a lie. The one thing that makes us stronger and makes us more powerful is the fact that we can remember it.
Yes.
When we can remember it and we can say, hold on, I know what it feels like. I know what it means. And I think that is why we can be better coaches and leaders and helpers to the next person, is because we know.
Yeah.
So,
To me, it's
yeah.
if we remain vigilant to it, like you said, that's what healing and health
Mm,
looks like. You're
yeah.
aware, you have emotional clarity. And what you just described is exactly what I was saying. Like
Mhm.
when you have,
Yeah.
I use the peace sign because it's vigilance. When you remain vigilant to these things and you recognize in that moment, oh no, I just, like I said, reaction that's, and we're human, a reaction that's
Yeah.
bigger than what it needed to be, right? And
Yep.
knowing deep within our being that wasn't a good way to handle it, right? And then we
Yeah.
acknowledge it like you did. You acknowledged it. And that to me is what keeps us connected. That's
Yeah.
what keeps us because I agree with you. Like things, there's no magic fix. It's a matter of knowing what shaped us, and then it's about
Mhm.
when it's triggered, right? Knowing the patterns and traits we have as a result, and we see them, we name them, we change them. And sometimes,
Yeah.
it's daily change for many until they can get into that groove. That's what I say. Once I got into the groove of recognition, and then, like you said, you go through that, you do the work, you go through the healing, you get to that good place. But when it comes back, you know what to do. That to me is
Yes.
beautiful. That was such
Yes.
a great
Because
story.
it's empowering, and you need to realize that, when you are there to help that next person, right? And they're in that space where you have been because you remember. That's where that empathy can come. It's when you can say, you know what? I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I know how you felt. And it is, I think that is why those counselors and those, um, you know, coaches and the ones that went through it, it's the one that walk the walk, not just talk the talk and not just
Yeah.
learned it from a book,
Yeah.
right? They make the better coaches. They do truly make the better helpers because they have lived experience.
Mhm.
They have
That
lived experience. And then you hear where somebody can say, how can you tell me you've been there? Oh, I've seen you walk through, and they make it sound like you're damaged goods,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You're damaged goods. How can you tell me anything? No, I can. The reason why I can is because I am damaged goods. I was there, but
Mhm.
no, you know, um, there's that one, I forgot the name of it, but the Japanese one where they take the teacup and they mend it
Mhm.
in gold.
Yes,
I
yes.
forgot
Oh,
the name of the
I
teacup,
yeah, I know what that's
right?
called, and I
There's a
can't.
name for
Yes,
it.
yes,
Oh
yes.
my gosh, we both know it and we can't think of the
Uh,
name.
I gotta look it up.
But that one, you gotta look it up.
Yeah.
That one. And I wanna do that. I wanna actually make one because that is how I look at life. We have those cracks, we have those things, but it doesn't have to be wrongful. It can be beautiful still, right? Yeah.
Kintsugi.
Oh yeah.
It's called kintsugi. No, but you're
That
right.
so
It's filling our
mhm.
cracks with gold, which is all about mending,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
mending with
But
love and kindness and understanding.
mhm. Yeah. But there's going to be those people out there in the world that know our past and they're going to use it against us. And I know because it's happened before. It's happened before. But the last A in Aloha is acute awareness. And it's in that acute awareness. We know it, we live it, right?
Mhm.
We're healed from it. And so when they bring it up, when they say things, we go, yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that is how we can do things like write a book and how you can do what you did and share the Aurora method,
Yeah,
right? So the Aurora method is rooted in self-awareness.
it is.
So yeah, and if you could share a little bit about that, was there a defining moment of awareness that shifted and how you saw yourself, your leadership, or your life when you were creating that set, that
Yeah,
new path?
and there's so many influences, but what I want to say is that after I had burned out that badly, right? I was so
Mhm,
ashamed. I just couldn't believe that I had lost myself so much. And so as I said, over
mm,
what felt like 10 years, I was on this journey. And part of that journey meant getting help. And I got that help. And I went to, I went to a psychologist and I worked on trauma. I worked on anger. I had an executive coach and she taught me affirmations. But what I started to, I read self-help books. I went back to some of the things that I loved. I did body work. I mean, I did everything. But what I found was that everything was in isolation. And so what the Aurora method, what inspired me to create the Aurora method was, as I said, I trusted my one friend. I was vulnerable with her. I was telling her what was going on. I had to admit what happened. I didn't want to tell anyone. I tried to kill myself. And when she showed me this tool, and this wasn't right after it happened. It was probably a good year or so after it happened. But anyway, what I discovered was she showed me self-awareness, but then I started looking at all the other things I'd been learned, I had been taught, right? So once I saw what the traits were, then I understood, okay, I can think and do the opposite, right? I can create an affirmation I can release it and I can shift it, right? I can change it, I can affirm it. And then as I was going along and I was thinking about some of the things that I learned in therapy in terms of, you know, the whole idea of like, especially like when I was reactive, like how to calm myself. That's when I realized I can do active daily work because what was happening as I was getting the help for that first couple of years, I still found myself reacting. And I felt so much shame. It was like, oh, and I thought I was a horrible, rotten person. And that critical voice was constantly scolding me. And I wanted that voice to shut up, right? Like stop yelling at me, right? And what I found was as I started piecing this together, this was a framework that was built over time, right? As I started piecing it together, and then I realized, as I said before, what I did affected others. I have to mend that if I want to, as I was getting more restoration to me, I wanted to reach back out to the people in my life. And then as you talked about, I call it deceptive complacency because we all start to feel better. And I did do that. I let it go. I was like, I don't need to do this anymore. And it all came back. The reactions started getting more frequent. It was coming back again. I was burning out at work. So what had happened was it was about 3 years into my company. I just remember it was the same thing. Like I was just do and do and do and do and do, right? And then when things didn't go my way, I was stew and stew and stew and stew and stew, and I was just so like I was unhappy again, and I was getting reactive again, and I was like, I like something's got to give here. And what I realized was I had to throw myself into the daily work. That's when the end of day reflection started, and that's when the morning intention started. And then from that point on, now I get up in the morning, I have a whole routine. I raise my arms to the sky, I'm affirming. I mean, I have a whole routine that I do. And it takes me sometimes 15 minutes, depending on where my thinking was the day before and what my intentions are going into that day. But I stretch my body with it and I connect my body with all of it. And I do it daily now. And I realize that, that acute awareness comes when we remain aware. And the only way to remain aware is to stay connected, right? And what I find is that my consciousness, and I always do this, I find my consciousness is aligned when I practice this daily. And when I don't, I'm, like misery and negative thinking like prey on me. And I'm prey, you know what I mean? It's like there's an Indian proverb about what wolf will you feed, you know? And when I back
True,
off from my
true.
practices, rather than feeding the good wolf with positive thoughts and love and kindness, I let that critical negative wolf start knitting away at me. And and I have to be ever vigilant to that. So so that acute awareness is so critically important, and the Aurora method is really just a practical framework, right? And it starts with, as I said, recognizing that self assessment, recognizing how did your life experiences shape you. And then once you see it, you name it, then you start practicing change. As you live in change, right, you start healing, you start finding your voice, you communicate differently, you learn how to acknowledge, right? And then as you mend and you restore that connection, oh, it feels so good. What I always implore everyone to think about is, do you want to lose that? No. So that's why I stay committed. And when the deceptive complacency happens and you have another human experience, which we have daily, and you react in a way, don't feed the negative wolf, right? Don't feed the bad wolf. Recognize you just got to re-up and look at your practices and look at where you backed off and just ease right back in. And that's what I do. And I've been doing that for so 1999, I would say for over 20 years I've been doing that, you know.
Oh,
So
that is so good. That is so, so good. So powerful, so helpful. So if a woman or man, if a person was listening right now and is successful on the outside, but is feeling and is exhausted on the inside, what is the most loving truth you'd want this person to hear today?
it goes right back to what you said earlier, that exhaustion and that burnout is nothing more than a signal, and it's time
Mm,
to love yourself, right? It's time to not sacrifice and abandon you. It's time to come home to you, you know, and really
nice.
put yourself first, because by putting yourself first, what you get back is so much bigger.
So good. So good. And since we're on the Walking in Aloha, let's talk stories. What does aloha always mean to you in this season of your life?
So in this season, I would say it's all about kindness and understanding. I love
Nice.
I love the love of aloha, and and so to me it's just that kindness and understanding of others, and for me in my daily life it's about serenity. It's just serenity and peace.
I love that. Serenity. I always love that word, you know?
I seek it daily.
Uh, yeah. Oh, Tracy, mahalo so much for sharing your honesty, your insight, and your heart.
Thank you.
Your story reminds us that clarity and connection don't come from doing more, but from becoming more aware of what's happening within.
Hmm.
And to our listeners, I encourage you to check out Tracy's book, Life Storms Finding Your Clear Sky,
Here it
and
is.
learn more about more about her work through the Aurora method. And is there a link or something that they can continue
Yeah, my
you would want?
website's all the information's right on my website, tracydoyle.life, if they want to learn more about how to, really put the Aurora practices into practice. I'm actually offering a free cohort. So if
Nice.
anyone is interested, schedule a one-on-one with me so we can ensure that the Aurora method's right for you. And then the other thing is the book is available on Amazon in 4 formats. I know how people are
Oh,
so busy. I put it in an audio and an ebook so people can read it while they're on their phones and things like that.
oh, that's so perfect. I love it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for staying on with us and just this valuable message. This valuable message. So, As always, remember, walk in aloha, live your God potential life with affirmations and actions, leadership and love, overcoming obstacles, health and healing, and that acute awareness. And until next time, keep shining, keep listening inward, not just outward, and keep living aloha always. And and once again, thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Michelle.
much, Tracy, for being here.
Thank you.
Aloha,
Aloha.
everyone. Ahui ho.